Hi, my name is Carlo Volpe,
And I'm Desmond Silva,
and
and
welcome to
welcome to
Centerville
Centerville
Voice.
Voice.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Centerville Voice. My name is Carlo, my good friend Desmond. How are you, Des?
Okay, about you, Carlo.
I'm awesome, Des, and welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. If you're watching online, of course, thanks for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. Hit the notifications link as well, bell rather, so you'll be notified every time we have a new episode. So, folks, we're going to jump right back into a continuation of our last episode, which is all around marriage, and kind of where we left off. I think was around the idea of marriage not necessarily being an oppressive thing. Oftentimes people think about it that way. And Des, you and I think we agree on the idea that I think it may have been an invention from women. And what do you think about that? I mean,
Yeah, definitely a woman's invention.
yeah. And then the idea of like courting and all that, like let's kind of continue off from there. What do you think?
Yeah, so like we were saying, but for the courting part, is the idea was that was to sum up on what we talked about. It was there was some older woman who had kids who got smart, and she wanted, and the whole idea you got to understand is that the successfulness in nature is bringing your is to make sure that your genes and your offspring survive, that your progeny they survive, right?
Yeah.
So you end up with so if you had like if a person with 10 kids was seen as more successful than a person with just four kids.
Okay.
And if you had no kids, you were seen as cursed back then,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
I know a lot of people these days are not interested in having kids, but
Sure.
that's what it was like back those days. Everybody wanted kids, right? Heck, even the clergy wanted kids.
Well,
So
if you think about it, I mean, it makes sense from a biological standpoint. It is a sign of success for that species, right?
exactly,
Reproduction. That's success from a
yeah,
biological standpoint.
to make sure your DNA passes on, and that's the whole purpose of that's why we have reproduction is to keep the species going and making sure that our DNA survives, right? So with that in mind, if you have that's why where the way that men would have worked back then is that, or that they did work back then, is that they would have had relations with as many women as they could, right?
Sure.
Like as often as they could, hoping that at least several of those women. I mean, let's say about he has I don't know 15 women he's gone with, right, in a year, right? Those 15 women, out of those 15 women, 10 get pregnant, right? Out of the 10 that get pregnant, five of the children survive,
Yeah.
right? To adulthood, right? So they're like, oh, okay. So he's playing statistics and kind of like Russian roulette type of scenario, right?
We're playing
Or
the
like
odds, right?
it's
Yeah.
he's playing the odds. Women couldn't do that. Women can't do that.
Yeah.
They never could. They never can, and never will. It's just not made for. That's a limitation of their biology as opposed to the limitation of the limitations of male biology. Men have their own limitations as well in terms
Sure.
of their biology. But then, of course, But the thing is, each side has a different, set of limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the women, is that she can only have one child, or sometimes two or three, on the odd case, but more than often one child every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And every single time that she has that child, it's always going to be from one man. So she can have relations with five men in like 5 days. Only one of them is going to be the one who sires her child, right?
Mm-hmm.
She conceives by. So it's completely worthless from that perspective for a woman to even, bother in that respect, right? So, and in the end, she's the one who gets pregnant. She's the one who has to feed the kid. She's the one who has to raise the kid. She's the one who has to go out and forage. Sometimes maybe put the kid in a hovel, right,
Mm-hmm.
a little hole or something, and go off and forage for berries, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even catch a small fish from the shore or catch little animals, right, in order to feed her family, right?
Yeah.
And she could have one, two, three kids. And then on top of that, she has to worry about infant mortality rates because infant mortality rates would have been much higher back then, right?
So what
So
would be, so just to add in to interject, what would be the benefit then of having a regular man
yeah, exactly.
in the
That's what
early
happens. And then you
stages of
have the
marriage?
man that's there because the man had it good. let's put it that way. Men back then, they had it really, really good because they could go with, there was no modern day societal, uh, you know, how like the type of responsibility that men have today, or not, I don't know, like, that have had for the past few centuries that have
Yes.
been imposed on them through our
Millennia.
upbringing.
Yeah.
That was never there at that time, right? It was like,
Before the pairing
yeah,
came up, before
exactly. For the pairing part,
permanent pairings.
there was no such commitment.
Mhm.
He just had his if there was a female who accepted him, or she came after him because they could go both ways.
Mhm.
Uh, he then he had his fun and then he left. That's it. But she's the one who had to do all the work. In the meantime, he was all hunting out with his friends, going fishing and stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? So
Yeah, so for sure. I mean, that's the thing. So the idea then, if you look at it from that perspective, if you follow that train of thought, I mean, the idea that it's an oppressive thing doesn't really jive to the idea
it
that
doesn't
it
jive.
was something that was put on by men. I mean, because if
It
you think
was
about it, like
no.
it is in the best interest of women. Like you said, the wise women got together, the wise females got together and said, well, listen, we're gonna make sure that if we're going to have more children, because that's what we want to do, right? The best way to secure that is to have another, I mean, even just the simple state of it, have another body to hunt, have another body there to fish,
Mhm.
have another body to protect from the wild beasts and everything else, right? I mean, and
Exactly.
there's trade-off, and I hate to be crude about this, but the trade-off was definitely going to be the mating at some point,
Was and
right?
that's definitely what was the incentive to the man, because if the woman wanted, the thing is, it had to be a two-way street
For
for it to
sure.
work. Otherwise, the man's going to be like, goodbye. There's no legal system.
No.
There's nothing holding him to
Yeah.
stay with her. There's absolutely nothing, no repercussions.
Yeah.
If he wanted to leave, he could leave like that. Okay.
Mhm.
He just says, okay, bye. Okay. And just walk away. He goes off hunting and he's off to his happy life all over again while she's
Yeah.
left with the kids.
Yeah.
Right. And she has to struggle then. So it was in the best interest back then for her to have the man as an extra body, because he's not the one he's not the one who who bears the kids and all that stuff. He's not getting pregnant.
That's
So
right.
while she's pregnant, when a pregnant woman is the woman is most vulnerable when she's pregnant, because
Sure.
her maneuverability goes down in a lot of cases. There's some women who can still maneuver around, but that when they're
On
pregnant.
average, for sure. I mean, yeah, but you're
Yeah,
growing a child. You have like the most important job in the world going on, right? For sure.
exactly. So, but in the last, especially in the last month of pregnancy, it's very, very difficult in the wild, right?
Oh, yeah.
A woman would be extremely vulnerable in her last day of pregnancy, last few days or last month of pregnancy, in the ninth month,
Oh, yeah.
where any stress and all that stuff could cause problems for the baby. So she has to be able to, the best scenario is for her to relax and take it easy during that time and stay healthy and have a good mindset, and not have to worry during
Yeah,
that time. So
exactly.
what happened though, so of course you got some old grandmas who got wised up, and they tell their daughters, if you want to have, or if you want if there's a man who comes after you, okay, first of all, make sure he's a good one. Okay, check, see if he's a good one, check him out. Okay, when he wants to court you, okay, he can court you, but then here's the deal. Okay, if he wants to court you and he wants to have his way with you, he has to stick with you all the way through,
Yeah,
all the way through, at least until maybe like the kids are fully grown up, right? At
sure.
least, if not,
But
if not
ideally
longer.
through life, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because remember, people didn't have very long lifespans back then. You're talking about
Yeah.
people having kids at like 16 years old. Like the women were having kids at 16, or if you had kids at 16, you were considered old. Let's
Sure.
put it that way. So
Yeah.
like at 16 years old, and the men would probably been like a few years older, right? Because the ones who were older were more experienced and they knew how to hunt. They knew how to do all those. They had all those skills.
Yeah.
They had proven themselves,
That's
right?
the thing. It makes them more marketable, right? That's the thing that
Exactly.
a lot of people don't realize sometimes. Not to sidetrack, but that's oftentimes why older men these days end up with younger women, is that they are attractive because they're more successful, or they essentially hunted and gathered more.
Exactly. And with women have always been, if you look at women, what they're
And it's not a
attracted.
shot against women at all. It's just
No, it's not a
natural.
shot against women. This is natural. I mean, this
Yeah.
just happens.
Yeah.
Men, their wiring is the same, right? And women, their basic wiring is the same. It's never, that hasn't changed. But
Yeah.
because their basic wiring is based on success, right? The success of a male, his potential to be successful means that her offspring has an increased chance of being successful. So that's in their head, in the back of their head. It's completely subconscious. It's not something that you think of actively, right? So early on, a successful male was one who was strong and, who looked strong and
Could
fast and
provide. Yeah.
was able and big, more likely, or lead and wiry, depending on the environment that he was in, right? They, like, if you were off in Europe, of course, they'd want the bigger men who were able to survive in the harsh winters and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
If you're in Africa, you want the ones who were the fast runners who could run after gazelle. If you wanted in Asia, of course, they would have, some similar thing of that sort, ones who were good hunters at the very beginning as well. And then eventually they had innovations and stuff like that. The men started to, because of the men being competing over the females over time, right? They would try to show, who's the most successful. Then what happens is, okay, guys start to smarten up. Then that's when you end up with these technological inventions that start happening, such as, the wheel and carts and all this stuff, in order to and weapons, to make it so that this guy could be more productive and more successful. So if he shows himself to be more successful, he becomes more attractive to the females.
And if you think about it, it makes, even for the men that are, or for the men that are already in pairs and couples, all this advancement in technology made it easier to be safer, made it easier to have a safer home, easier to gather food. All these advancements, right, was easier to just do the regular survive in life. And you're right, the idea that this was oppressive to women is kind of crazy if you think about it, because, and we touched on earlier, is that I've always thought, I mean, I was raised right. I was always realized that, women are valuable. And in my eyes, really the most valuable, out of the men and women. And there's a couple easy ways we can kind of, draw, examples of that. Something like, you mentioned earlier that, or you mentioned, we were talking offline, that oftentimes, the women and children are protected and the men go to battle. Well, why? We're replaceable. Like, let's be honest. Men are replaceable, right? From a genetic standpoint, or from a biological standpoint, rather. And just like in nature, the male wolves are replaceable, much more replaceable than the female wolves, right? And the chimpanzees and everybody. But it's funny is that they're more valuable. Women are more valuable. Children are more. Women, of course, are more valuable because they create all life, and children are valuable because they're our future.
Yes.
There you go. So this is why women and children are protected, and the men go to battle. And then, like we thought earlier on, but I just kind of want to carry on my thought, is that it makes sense why populations of men have been decimated over the years, over the centuries, after wars and wars and wars, right?
Exactly. I mean, look at World War II.
And then the baby boom. There's essentially been many baby booms, right?
Exactly. What happened is the men came back, boom, a whole bunch of babies. Right?
Exactly. That came back. And then the idea that the men are, like, I don't want to say expendable, but sort of, right? From in the grand scheme of things, they were, because
men have their own value, but it's different. Yes. Their value is in defense. That's pretty much a defense and offense.
Resourcefulness. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, defense, offense, and it's playing a support role. It's essentially making sure, they're the shields of the family, and that's what we end up with. What happened back then when they formed, the husband staying back. So again, the deal was that he have relations with the woman as much as he wanted. She would cook and prepare the food that's brought home. He had to go and gather the food. He had to go and bring it home. He had to defend the family in the case of if there was under attack whether by animals or by rival humans, other rival communities, right? And that formed the very building block of society, because that was the family. And what you started to see is that because the women were at home, they were the ones doing all the talking with each other while the men were out. They would talk in their own talk as well, but the women were the ones who were starting to build, make the homes into homes.
The networking too, the community, the whole.
And they started to become, women were always more social. If you look at even, I mean, I can just look at my little niece, right? And she's far more talkative than my son was at her age, right?
Sure.
Where my son would have picked up on walking faster than she would have. So the thing is, the the moms, when they would get together, they start to stay together, and then you see these families start to, start with grandma and grandpa. Then you have the kids, and then you'd have, the boys would, back then it would be the boys would come and join the girl's family, right? And then they would stay there with them. And so it was, and even in the Bible, if you look at it, what it says is that in Genesis, is that a man leaves his mother and father, and becomes one with his wife. So now the thing is that somewhere down the line, unfortunately, that became skewed, right? Because if you look at the origins, the very first communities were matriarchal, right?
Yeah. And Desmond, I just want to cut you off for a second. I wanted to touch before we get into that. You mentioned earlier about the Bible. There was this part in
yes.
Men made.
Yeah, and even think about equality between men and women. If you look at the Bible, a lot of people.
We'll get into.
Yeah, and this is what happens if you're not educated on a religious text, right? You end up skewing this thing. A lot of people will take. There's one part of the Bible which says, "Wives, submit to your husband as seem fitting in the Lord," but they never tell the second part. That's what you talk about taking something out of context. The full statement is this: wives, submit to your husbands as seem fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, that he even died for her, that in order to make her holy, right? So that puts things a lot in perspective. And when they say wives, submit to your husbands as in fitting in the Lord, it means if your husband asks you to do something and it's nothing bad, just do it, right? But if it's something that's bad, don't do it. If it's obviously wrong, you shouldn't do it.
Like if Jesus wouldn't approve, you don't have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what they said, as in fitting in the Lord, because ultimately, if you have that focus as there is this one, standard, this gold standard, which for Jews and Christians and Muslims is God, or just same God that Muslims call Allah, or Jews call Yahweh, many Christians call Jehovah, whatever the case may be, or just God, and it's just that's the gold standard, right? So the husband is not the gold standard. God's the whole gold standard, right? The wife is not the gold standard. God's the gold standard. So if you look at the gold standard and say, okay, according to the gold standard, should I be doing this or not, right? Then you can make a better decision. The woman had to have a very good sense of judgment in that sense, right? So if your husband came home tired, he sat down on the thing, and like he's been out in the fields or out hunting all day, and he says, honey, can I have a drink? Yeah, just give him a drink. Is it gonna hurt you? No, right? Just hand the guy a drink. Like, why do you want to argue with that? Like, seriously, what's the bicker about it, right? Same way, if the husband asks, if you go and ask, honey, can you go take out the garbage, right? Why fight about that?
Go take out the garbage.
Go take out the garbage, right? Same thing. I mean, how many times my wife asked?
That's so funny because so many people will be listening or might think, that's so old school. But then, once you think about it, I think the longer people are married and the longer people are in relationships, I think the more they realize the little things aren't worth it, right? The little fights that used to be big fights at year 1 through 5 or year 1 through 10 or whatever become just not even fights anymore. Because it's like, if you want to live in peace, you're going to have to be tolerant.
Yeah, be compromises.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you're just putting up with something, right? It's actually acceptance, and it's actually there's a difference between putting up with something and accepting somebody for it, right?
And there's another part of the Bible which stated for those who don't know about the creation story in the Bible, and also which would be the Jewish creation story as well, they say that women, Eve, the first woman, was created from the rib of Adam. Now, scientifically, this of course is not true. It's not the scientific side that matters here. It's the lesson that's being taught. Okay, and the lessons being taught is that the woman was made from his side. And if you go further in the Bible into the book of St. Paul gains inspiration from this, and he states, "Woman was not created from a man's foot, that she should be below him or beneath him. She was not created, nor was she created from his head, that she should be above him, but rather created from his side, that she should be beside him," right? And that's true. And so this is in the Bible, 2,000-year-old text, right? And there's a great deal of wisdom in there that a lot of people these days could easily could easily learn from. I mean, if you did,
Absolutely.
you wouldn't be
Yeah.
having a lot of these issues if people actually just took the Bible from within context,
Well,
right?
exactly. It's like exactly what you're saying. Like you can cherry pick anything, right? The Bible, and I've done it in the past. I've cherry picked things out of the Bible, out of the Quran, out of the Torah, and you know, and say like, what's going on? This is so outdated. This is so, and you know, whatever. But you know, it's read the next couple verses. Read the couple verses before,
Read the
right?
whole paragraph. Like
Exactly.
I
Read the whole
still
story.
remember
Read the
one part.
chapter.
Yeah, see, there's one part of the Bible where where this one person I know who is pro-abortion, and she cherry picked one section of the Bible out of context, and basically said, "Oh, the Bible says it's okay to have abortions," and like, no, it doesn't. If you look at the whole context of the story, uh, it was it was not that it was not that they were trying to have an abortion, but rather this woman did something. There was this woman was under suspect as if she had done something wrong. Now, the worst thing you could ever do to a pregnant woman back then was to take away her baby, her unborn baby, right? So it's completely different
Understand?
culture back then when you're thinking about what it is
Yeah.
today and what it is back then. Children were children were more precious than the adults,
Oh my God. You know,
right? They were the real kings and queens
you just made me
of,
realize that. You just made me
yeah.
realize that in that one statement. It's like it was the most precious thing, right?
Exactly. And so
And
what they did was they wanted to make sure that she was true to that she was telling the truth. So a priest came and put basically put his hands, she was laid on a table,
yeah.
and he prayed over her, and he said that if she is untrue, so if she was true, the child would survive. But if she is untrue, may this curse be upon her, right? That the child, if she is untrue, that the child within her will die,
Wow.
right? So it was a test, and with this, because apparently this, I'll have to go and look back at that one, but it was apparently she had done. They had thought that she had done something very very bad, right?
Okay.
At any time that you see, like when King David sinned greatly, what happened to him is his first child, the one who was born before King Solomon, he died in the womb, right? It was a curse. It was seen as a curse. That child unfortunately was taken aback and died in not by a human pulling the child out,
Mm-hmm.
but rather was stillborn, and not by
But
natural causes.
that speaks to the whole idea that just we're just children were cherished a lot more, and it's sad to say that we actually don't protect children as much as we did before.
No, we don't. And a
Not
lot of the
nearly.
people, yeah, and a
Wow.
lot of people, they go around, they have the reasoning they have for abortion is the child is going to suffer, so kill the child. Um, no,
That's a pretty bad assumption
yeah,
too,
that's a
though.
pretty bad assumption. I mean, like, I would not want to happen that to me. If people thought about that all across the board, including my mom and dad, I would not be here because
Yeah.
I got spina bifida. And they're like, oh, he's going to suffer.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. There's a lot of disabled people there that like living
Absolutely.
their lives. Thank you very much.
And not to be, you know, too cliche, but life is all about suffering. I mean,
Yeah. No
it's
one, everyone has some form of suffering or some form of
exactly.
tears that they're going to have. No one goes through, if you do go through life completely, happy from beginning to end.
Doesn't sound normal.
It
No.
doesn't sound like that. I mean, Little Wayne, let's put it this way, Little
Yeah.
Wayne, he got shot when he was a kid, but he still thinks that throughout his entire life, he's nothing but blessed,
Yeah.
right? He said that.
That's so. I'm gonna go back to marriage for a second. What do you think happened with marriage over the last, I mean, 50 years, 60, maybe even 100 years? I don't know. It seems I don't want to blame the feminist movement itself, but there are some elements of the feminist movement in my mind that are damaging to marriages themselves. It's just the family
Mhm.
element, not every element, of course, feminism, because most feminism I 100% agree with, right?
Yeah.
But some of the tactics or some of the policies or some of the some of the things that came out of it seem to be worse for the family overall.
Yeah.
So,
Like
it's
for,
undeniable.
so, I mean, if you look at, because a lot of people were going around,
And I don't mean equality, because equality is different than feminism. Equality is one thing.
yes, feminism is not about equality. Feminism, if it's not about equality, it's not about egalitarianism. If it really was about equal rights between men and women, they would have said this is, about basically being an egalitarian, right?
Yeah.
Not feminist. Obviously, if you say that you're a feminist, you're about women's rights, not equal rights, right?
Mhm.
It's just, and it's, if you ever look at feminism, it's always about women's rights, women's rights, women's rights. They never talk about men's rights.
So who convinced a population, the West for starters, right, that women were oppressed all of a sudden? Like who? What
Well,
was it?
the thing,
Advertising?
well, to be honest, the thing is, there were even in the old times, like there were a lot of laws which were written with good intention that were eventually, as time went on, were skewed and taken advantage of in the
Okay.
other way around. Even if you look at Islam with the law that allows a man to have more than one wife, there's a purpose for that. Is that, of course, when particularly in that area, it was a fairly volatile area for the longest time.
Okay.
And if you had a woman who lost her husband, she was seen as vulnerable and possibly even destitute. To make sure that she was kept safe, that her husband's brother would have to marry her. The
That's
whole purpose of that was, first of all, to make sure that the woman was kept safe, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So because if, for instance, if the raiders came in or something like that, if you didn't
Mhm.
have a father or a brother or a son, right,
Gotcha. So
there's
after
no
that
one to
time,
defend you.
so after that time, is that when the law changed to have many wives or many
Well,
husbands?
yeah, well, it was not just there. Like even King David, he had many wives as well, right?
Okay.
He had many
Okay.
wives.
Makes sense from a
Abraham had two
protection standpoint.
wives, right?
Yeah.
So,
But I
so
thought
Abraham,
I
no,
thought
sorry, no,
sorry, I
Abraham,
thought
not Isaac, or Isaac or Jacob. Sorry, Jacob had two wives.
okay. Sorry.
Jacob.
So that story you were telling me, I thought that was kind of going to lead me into the how he made it many wives, but that
Yeah, but
was
no, that's an example of what happened in those days to make sure that the woman was protected and make sure
so the
that, because
brother took care of it or something else. And that makes
exactly
sense
the
too because
idea was to make sure that she had a son.
yeah.
Right?
Well, and it makes sense too from the other perspective of just like if you think about it, I mean, the idea of a best man, right? The idea of like in Italian tradition, a compare or somebody is they're not just a witness to your wedding, but they're there, someone who either take care of your wife if something happened to you, take care
Mhm.
of your kids, something happened to you, that's a godfather kind of thing, right? All that
Yeah.
stuff kind of rolls into one, right?
And in Christianity, that's when things changed. Jesus basically said only a man may only have one wife. That
Yeah.
changed afterwards, right? And because at that point the families had gotten so big, right,
Mhm.
that you and everyone would basically, one person would always take care of the other. But
Let's
even in
yeah.
that time, even in that time, if you were at Jesus' time, if you were a woman and you had lost your father, your husband, you had no if you had no brothers, and if you had no sons,
Mhm.
you're screwed. And
Yeah.
that's why at the foot of the cross, because a lot of people think that Mary had a lot of kids. Don't, she didn't. She only had one. That was Jesus. And the
Okay.
proof of that is that Jesus on the cross, when he saw the apostle John next to his mother Mary, who was she had very good reason, other than the fact that her son was dying, to
Yeah.
be down there weeping like crazy, because
Yeah.
the moment he's gone, she's destitute, right? So she, not only she was losing her one and only child, which she's in a very horrific manner, but
Yeah.
she was now going to be destitute and no one to take care of her, and she wouldn't have nothing. And so
Yeah.
what Jesus did was he said to apostle he said to Mary, when he's looking at John, women, behold your son, right? And to John he said, behold your mother, right? And gave up,
Yeah.
basically giving Mary as, from handing Mary off from Jesus over to John. And from that day John looked after Mary as his mother,
Wow. So
right?
gave Mary another son. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was to make sure that she was safe. That's why they did that. That's why he did that. And people don't
Wow.
quite understand that, but that's the whole
Yeah.
purpose of that.
Well, and that's the thing. So to fast forward to 2020 or 2021, wherever year
Yeah.
we're in now, marriage is so different these days, right? Because we're gonna have to wrap this up soon. But marriage
Yeah.
is so different these days. It's come such a long way. Not only is it not, well, for maybe half the population or more, it maybe is still have a lot of practical value, right? But for a lot of the population, it doesn't have a practical value. I think if you dig deep down, it still does for a lot of people. But at the surface level, at least, it doesn't have a practical value. Um, especially if you're considering civil marriages and civil unions, right? They really
Yes.
don't. Some of them do still, of course. Some of them are still financially intertwined, of course, heavily, of course. But in the traditional sense, the idea of, keeping, a man at home to protect and provide and everything else. When you're talking about, same-sex marriages, and no judgment, right? But when you talk about same-sex marriages, the idea of marriage does change. So I wonder, does it water down marriage for people? Does it devalue
It's
it for some people?
different though. The thing is, what we were talking about with same-sex civil unions is that that is just that it's a civil union, right? It's not the same as a practical marriage. When I mean practical marriage, I'm talking about take away the legality, take away the civil suits, take away the religion and all that stuff, keep it back at its core. And it goes back to the anthropological origins and historical origins of marriage, as we mentioned before, as the invention of a woman to make sure that husbands took that the man took responsibility for the children that he sired, right? And in order to make sure that those children were successful. And again, like I mentioned in the previous episode, there were biological repercussions that helped us evolve to the point where before we had that type of scenario arrangement happening, we had kids who were 8 years old, fully grown at adult size. And now we have kids who, humans have one of the longest adolescent periods and one of the longest childhoods in the animal kingdom. So
and we're lucky because of it. It's a luxury to have that.
It is a luxury to have that, right?
Okay.
So the thing is, I mean, it is a bit like for the civil marriages, that stuff is just kind of like it just got added on afterwards, right? The whole idea of having like arranged marriages, even the arranged marriage, it was all about making sure that the girl and the boy were together and secure, right? And they would make a good family, right? You're never going to see an arranged gay marriage, okay? So,
well, I mean, hey, the left is pretty progressive. You never know.
Well, okay. The moment that happens in India, and Sri Lanka, let me know.
Yeah, not in India. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, and the idea that like, the civil union, it did change things. But let's talk about the idea that like, it's. Where's I going with this? So like marriage is changing, and it's whether it's devaluing or not devalue it, like that does change it when there's same-sex marriage, right? It does change the idea of the practical thing. But what at the same time as the people are talking about marriage, I feel like every issue is getting thrown up in the air, is getting tossed up in the air now, and everything is around this whole sex and gender, right? The whole idea of sex and gender is even questioning marriage itself, because like it's hard for people to accept the idea, well, marriage is man and a woman, right? And they have a child, and the purpose of marriage is, from a practical standpoint, is to keep this family together for the best thing for the children. Exactly. But then at the same time, we're inundated by a world where we're supposed to be told it's okay to say you can have a relationship with a flower and that's fine, or you can have a relationship with a chair and that's fine.
And that's actually happening.
Well, and I'm exaggerating, but you're right, like, because it started with, and it's totally fine to say men and men, woman and woman, man and woman, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you start saying that there's no such thing as gender, there's no such thing as biological differences, and gender is an abstract, and we'll talk about that in future episodes as well. But the idea that gender is a social abstract, then you're messing with nature, because you can't change.
Even the idea of saying that homosexual marriage is equal to practical marriage goes against evolution, essentially. And when you think about it, it's not really the same thing. It's the civil union that you have amongst homosexuals is for companionship, right?
And love and all that, and even
love and all that. It's for companionship.
Exactly.
It's the main thing. I mean, it's the same idea.
It's not to procreate, right? It's not.
Yeah, it's not really like if you look at like, I don't know, an 80-year-old man and an 80-year-old woman, right? Mm-hmm. They get married. That's primarily for companionship, right?
For sure.
Because because what's the chances of an 80-year-old woman bearing children, especially when she's past menopause? It is very, very slim, and it's also very dangerous.
It's possible. Right? She's not gonna have a baby at 80. Yeah,
no, that's the thing. But the same idea. So with the homosexual community, we know very well. You put two men together, they're not going to produce a baby. You put two men together, you're not going to produce a baby.
With technology, right? We talked about technology advances. With technology, two men can adopt a baby, right? That's a technology.
two men can adopt. I mean, there are methods where one of the men can have a biological child and the other one ends up being being the adopted parent. But the thing is with technology, with the moment you have technological changes, regardless of, and I know there are people who can disagree with this, but when you're born man, you're still male. You're still a man, you're still male. If you're born a woman, you are still female. And no matter what type of surgery or cosmetic surgery you do, it's not going to change that. And it's unfortunate that there are a lot of people who have this issue with not being able to get over that reality and who are upset with that reality or the reality that they're with. But unfortunately, nature doesn't care. Like, I'd love to be, and like, look at me, I'd love to be able to
two different discussions. Well, yeah, exactly. It's two different discussions. One discussion is what, nature, right? Because from a biological standpoint, from an evolutionary standpoint, all nature cares about is us progressing our genes.
Exactly.
Right? And it's not going to do it. And this is not an attack on anybody who's gay or lesbian or bisexual, but it's not going to do it at as successful rate in the gay community. It's just not going to happen.
No.
By definition, straight people produce faster. Let's just say that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't have straight people, you're not going to have homosexuals.
So because of that, and because of that, like, without anybody reproducing, there's no people at all. So.
Exactly. And the thing is with, I mean, I've seen some videos of from the LGBT community about what would happen if it was seen as bad to be heterosexual, right? And the idea was everyone would be married, everyone being homosexual and all that stuff. And the only time that they would have children is when they have a mating season, a breeding time. That's it. Okay. So that was kind of a little bit odd, because here's the thing: you're homosexual. You're supposed to stick with two, so you can still go with a female with the opposite sex just to have kids. So that just tells me. The thing is, in order to do that, that means
experiment.
Yeah. So in order to do that, what that tells me is that because in order to produce like that, you need to have some sort of sexually heightened in order to do that. So how is it that and this is what the problem with this thing with the whole conversion therapy and all that stuff. If they're able to do that, what's preventing them from just sticking male and female? That's I don't know, it's just a question that's posed out there. Not to actually say anything, not to say anything bad, but it's just a question, right? So
I don't think I quite understand what you're saying, though. What do you mean exactly? Like,
what do you mean by that? Because the thing is, they created this video. This was created by the LGBT community.
Okay, explain again. What do you mean by this whole thing?
So this whole thing is that what they did was there was a group of LGBT community creators who wanted to show the world what it's like to be persecuted for being gay. Okay. So they made it so that all so they made a video in a community. Okay. There was like a homosexual utopia. Okay. So
it's like an experiment, social experiment.
Like social experiment. No, it's just it's a video.
Which is video.
It's a video. It's not. This doesn't actually really happen. But they made a video. Okay. Okay, about this happening. Okay, that this would happen. That throughout the world, everyone was gay, and there were It was considered a sin to be heterosexual. Okay. So they flipped it. In other words, from what it used to be about like 50 years ago, right? Or even further than that, like 100 years ago.
Which is funny how they can flip it to worse than today, but still.
So now the thing is, though, is that if you put it to how it was 100 years ago, right? You had male and female, heterosexual, right? Staying together, and they would never separate from each other in order to have kids. Okay. Now, what
do you mean in order to have kids?
In order to have children, the man and woman would stick together. Sure. And through that union, they would have children. Yeah. The homosexual community had a bit of, in that particular video, they had a bit of a small rule that was there. So you couldn't have homosexual marriages, but so you couldn't have heterosexual marriages, but in order to produce children, one member from the marriage could go off from his spouse or her spouse.
Go reproduce with
the opposite sex. In order to reproduce with someone of the opposite gender. Okay. So
if sounds like a terrible experiment.
Yeah,
Sounds like it was
that's
created by. Sounds like it was experiment on procreation created by gay people that don't procreate.
exactly. And so
I'm
they
sorry,
show
and it's not an attack on them, but it just
it's not a talk. It just doesn't make.
doesn't sound like children were involved in this
Yeah, but
discussion.
so they want. So the thing is, they want to
They're
have
not
kids.
involved,
So
but
there
thought
is
of.
still an innate wanting to have children, especially amongst the female groups,
Of
right?
course, that's not for sure. See,
Yeah. So
that's nature overriding things
yeah,
too.
exactly. Even
Not to
though they may
say,
find the same gender,
but not to say that by definition lesbians don't want babies. I'm not trying to say that either.
no,
But it's like it's so let me take that back. Yeah, but you're right. It's I don't know. I don't think that you should try and reprogram anybody. I don't think they should have these crazy scenarios where it's gonna be, let's hypothetical think that it was crazy to be, or it's against the law to be heterosexual, because we're not suggesting to be, and anybody. Some people are suggesting, but nobody with a sound mind is suggesting that it should be illegal to be homosexual.
yeah, like
If
no,
anything, people that are against it usually say, just keep it out of my business and I don't care.
that's pretty much and that's the whole point.
And there's always going to be a small group of people though that are assholes, right?
Yeah, I know.
Always.
You can get that everywhere. You can't really do much about it.
Exactly.
Right?
Bigots are bigots. Racists are racists. They're always going to be.
They're always going to be there, buddy. And there's nothing, and there's no amount of screaming and all that stuff. And then I mean, you have all these parades and all of this thing. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's like when they have the one episode of The View, right, where they were talking about domestic violence, right, and they finally come to the very big conclusion that there's no reason to hit a woman, right? There's no reason to hit a woman. Of course, there's a lot of reasons, let's put it that way, that someone may want to smack some woman upside the head.
But no good reasons.
But the thing is, it doesn't mean you should do it.
That's right.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Like,
no justifiable reason.
Love to smack their husband upside the head. That doesn't mean that they should do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's the same way, right? If he can, let's put it this way, okay? If he can control himself, and with a whole level of testosterone that he's got, just from basically throwing a punch in your skull, right, and basically flooring you, sending you to the hospital, right? Yeah. Let's put it last week. The average man is like that, right? They could do that if they want.
Well, and maybe that's something that is not talked about that much. I think there's a lot of restraint.
It should be a two-way street. You should be able to be equally as controlled, you know?
Well, exactly. And that doesn't get talked about that much. Exactly. It doesn't get talked about, as much as we probably can talk about it, is the idea that, like, there's a lot of restraint. There's a lot of self-control on both sides. Like, every day of the week, there are families out there that are couples out there that could be smacking the crap out of each other. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe they are, and they're just not, calling the cops or not, whatever. But it's yeah, exactly. It's just people's limits get pushed. People's limits, and the thing that stresses families out are things like money. Of course, it's going to be the number one stressor. Sex is also another stressor, of course, but sex is a stressor for a lot of couples because money is another stressor, right? Like, if your number one stressor in life is money, for example, and everything else then is going to get broken apart if your money is an issue, well, then of course everything's going to kind of.
Yeah, but going back to what I was saying about The View, so
yeah,
the thing is that they're having all these talks and all that stuff. I know people are probably going to preach at us too, right?
Sure.
But the thing is, who do you think is watching this thing? Do you think it's like wife beaters anonymous who are watching the show or something like that? Yeah. And like some guy who was who was beating his wife all this time was like, "Oh, hey, honey, what about you?" And like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I realize see the light now. Oh, okay, ipsa daisy." After he beat her up on the ground, like really, like seriously, you think that those types of guys, they should any guy who beats his wife should be freaking put in jail, whatever the case is. Absolutely. As long as if she, let's put it this way, he should be questioned, he should be put in jail and tried, right? And then
if he's beating his wife, I'm okay with him taking a couple punches before we ask him questions. But
I know what
exactly. Definitely ask him questions eventually.
Yeah, you gotta ask the questions, man. You don't go firefighters.
No. I get it.
Like Bill, it's like Bill. What's his? Shoot, what's that guy? That's a comedian.
Bill Maher. Bill Maher.
Not Bill Maher.
Bill Burr.
Bill Burr, that's it.
Monday Morning with Bill Burr, yeah.
Bill Burr, well, just like Bill Burr said, there's a fire. Firemen don't just put out the fire and run away. They sift through the debris. Here's an oily rag, right? Yeah. See what's the cause. So why don't you just ask questions about what happened? Because sometimes a lot of in those relationships there is it could be that the woman was not doing anything and the guy's just a jerk, but then on the other side it could be that they were at some end of the relationship type of fight, right,
Oh, for
where
sure.
she
Yeah.
was just
I'm not, yeah.
putting some mental stuff in his head, in his
Yeah,
face.
I know. Exactly. No, I'm not even talking about that for sure. But no, the idea of like you said about marriage, and maybe if we can wrap it up now, but the idea
Yep.
of like, I want to touch on the idea too that we mentioned earlier that like around feminism and whenever that feminism waves 1, 2, 3, or 4, is that somewhere
Yeah.
down the road they got kind of at least a large portion of the population kind of got convinced that every marriage was oppressive, right? And every woman was under the man's thumb and all of this stuff, right? And it really did, I think, affect the culture to the idea that marriage is not thought of in the same way as
No.
you. I mean, not only 50% of marriages end in divorce, but so many people are just not even getting married anymore. I wonder if like part of this whole attack on the whole sex itself is basically comes did it start from the idea that first was marriage is being attacked? Now if the family unit is being attacked, well, what's next to be attacked? The
Yeah.
sexes, the genders. Like some people say that this is a sign of the end of a civilization when we start
It's going to lead that way, because
dismantling,
if you
right?
start to break down, even when they break down the family and try and alter it in certain ways just to fit certain ideals that are not practical, it doesn't really make any sense. Like a good example, and they're trying to indoctrinate children at very small ages, starting with the whole gay pride parade thing that they did for it for Blue's Clues. Blue's Clues is aimed at toddlers and small kids,
Mhm.
and the singer in that is a drag queen. Is a drag queen who is holding a microphone with a fist on it. And I mean, if you have a fist on a microphone, that just tells me that you're basically saying about activism and
Yeah, very
who the heck teaches
provocative.
activism to a 4-year-old? I
The
mean,
left,
yeah,
correct.
it's
You know what's
ridiculous.
funny? And I want to say something, but if the right, anybody on the right tries to show or try to push any sort of activism like that, you know who does that on the right? The KKK.
Yeah,
And they're everybody, shits on them, and everybody, tells them how bad they are, and whatever. But it's funny that the left, it's and like you said, it's not about. I'm not comparing these groups to the KKK. I'm not comparing their message to the KKK, the hate that the KKK brings. What I'm in comparing it to is the dangers of early indoctrination,
yes.
right? We know the sooner you can get to a child's mind, the sooner you can inflect, or you can steer them, and you can manipulate them, and you can mold them, and for good or for good or bad, some of the criticisms of religion are for the same reason, right?
Yeah.
Or the same good things about religion as well. The younger you can teach good things, the better that child's going to be, and that's the whole idea. So the fact that marriage, or divorce rather, it seemed like divorce over the last couple
It's
decades, five
increased.
decades, is increased, but it was spun as empowerment. Why the hell was it spun as empowerment? Because if it destroys a family, I don't want to say it always destroys a family, because there are many, many families from separated parents that end up absolutely fine. My parents are divorced, right? Many people I know, their parents are divorced. But let's look at statistics. We can't lie. Statistically speaking, you have a better chance, right, of all success factors and all different metrics if it stays together. Why the assault on that?
Even in case, and even in your case, your parents waited until you were in your
High
late
school.
teens,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I was the youngest, so most of us were growing up and everything, but you're right. And a lot of people who did get divorced at that time did wait as well. It was kind of comes in movements, right? Like there was wavements where people got divorced, but they wait till the kids grow up. Now people don't get divorced, don't wait at all. And then people don't get married at all. So you know what I mean? It's actually coming a long way. And what's going to happen to marriage? Um, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it does make sense, because there's a lot of, I think is now you have a lot of women who are saying, I want my career first and I can get a bit, and this is a huge disillusion that a lot that they become very disillusioned after this. This is a very, very big mistake that a lot of women, it's a very impractical idea that they have, thinking that they can amass a lot of money, and because of their success
yeah,
getting money and all that stuff, that's going to attract a man. No, that's going to attract a gold digger, because the vast majority of men who actually find a woman attractive don't even care about her money.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, the thing that they're looking at, her hips.
Well, honestly, of all the women I've ever met, and of all when I was dating and single and everything, I've never ever did I know how much money a woman made. First of all, when
Yeah.
I met her, nor did I care how much they made. I mean, if you find out later or whatever, but rarely did I ever know. I mean, Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. That's so interesting. And but at the
And
same time,
Mhm.
that there was this real push, right, from society, this influencing push saying, maybe the marketing, the advertising, everything, Hollywood, right, saying, well, you don't want that. You want to make your success. You want to be who you can be. You want to be the CEO and the superstar, everything, and then you
Yep.
can have your a family at 40. Starting a family at 40. Let's look at practical reasons again. Back to biology. How many kids are you going to have?
Yep. As a matter
How
of
many?
fact, women are less successful at that in terms of having children, bearing children.
Sure.
The older you get, the less likely you're able to have kids.
Of course. Well,
Uh,
then, and then the risk of health and complications, everything.
exactly.
But this is
Wi-
a conversation that people don't like to hear about because
no,
they think it's not politically correct. And you don't have to be politically correct when you're talking in
no.
biology. Excuse my language. But when you're talking biology, you don't need to be politically correct because politically correctness is, we've seen now what's happened to it.
I mean, think about it. It's political correctness. It's
Yeah.
correctness according to politics.
Exactly.
And
It can
where
only
does
be wrong.
politics has ever gotten us, except for a whole bunch of lying geezers or old folks,
Yeah.
or and then even now, this the silver tongue, who's it, right?
Oh yeah.
Who's running, who's up on Parliament Hill in Canada? This
Yeah.
okay, they're just a bunch of liars. They're
Yeah.
just a bunch of liars and cheats who will basically try to gain, who will gain the as many votes as they can from as many people as they can in
Yeah.
order to keep their job. That's all
So
they do.
so we need to
That
start.
really, they don't care if you're on your deathbed. If you vote for them, that's all they care.
Well, and if the lobbyists get their money and they send big money to
Exactly. And
Washington,
lobbyists and all that stuff.
or Ottawa, but so yeah, this is it's. Oh, I lost what I was going to say with that, but no, it doesn't make sense, and it's gotten to.
No. And the other side to that, for not only are the women doing that now, because of the increased number of women who are basically trying to be dominant in the relationship, and as well as the increase in divorces that are happening, more and more young men are no longer wanting to get married, and we're going back to the
Yeah,
ancient times. The incentive for young men is no longer there.
yeah,
There's no more incentive.
yeah.
They don't. They're looking what's happening in the past and like, I'm not gonna get married. What's
Well,
gonna happen to me? I'm gonna go and I'm gonna find whatever woman wants me and is gonna treat me like
yeah.
a king,
And
right?
isn't that funny? Because if that happens, that seems to be the course that's happening. But if that happens, that's a perfect example how policy and social construction, social, reconstruction, social manipulation still reverts us back to biology.
Yeah.
You can't change biology.
No,
You can't. You can't
you
change
can't.
biology, and if you try to circumvent it, if you try to repress it, if you try and make it so, like right now, like the idea of toxic masculinity. This episode's going way too long, but the idea of toxic masculinity and all that stuff in the recent years, all of that is so dangerous because it's literally breaking down a society. And what happens, to finish your thought? What happens if we do revert back to there's no incentive to the man, right? And where the
It's gonna
population
break down.
is
Society
going
is
to
gonna
shrink.
break down because women are going to. Here's the thing: the early societies that were formed formed into matriarchal societies at very beginning, but in
Matriarchal
order,
mothers,
yeah,
yes.
the vast majority of matriarchal societies had either one of two things happen. One, if they stayed as matriarchal, they would be stuck in the tool age. I'm
Yeah.
talking about societies that started off from the Stone Age and moved up.
Okay.
The matriarchal societies, every single matriarchal society that is even to this day is still, it has came from the Stone Age and is still has managed to exist somehow to this day. They're stuck in the tool age. Every
Wow.
single community.
Why
And
is
but
that?
the thing is, the ones that the others that were stuck as matriarchal, they're either isolated and got lucky,
Okay.
or they were wiped out
Yeah.
completely. Because there was another society that came out, is the matriarchal societies that eventually became patriarchal societies,
Okay.
because the patriarchal societies were the ones that were able to turn into nations, because that's what it
And,
is,
and
because
that's the attack, though. The patriarchal society is looked upon as the oppressor.
it's not.
In today's times, right now, on the left, in the media, they say the patriarchy or patriarchy society equals oppression, and because of that, we're looking at times of where, you know, the matriarchal society was better, and it was good for all intents and purposes probably, but the patriarchal society, I didn't know that, but the patriarchal society was what brought in what, more defense, I'm assuming more defense.
Patriarchal society, well, here's the thing, is that the way that men and women manage things is different.
Yes.
Women micromanage, which is perfect for households. They need it. God knows they do the cooking, they watch the kids. I mean, you see a woman doing it. You know, you see a mom there, you know, breastfeeding one kid, you know, while cooking something, and then teaching her kid, another kid, math. She has to be about all those things that she's micromanaging.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
The men don't do that. The men macromanage, right? It's the other end. What they do is they delegate. They organize and they delegate. So what they do is they gather the men, and this is why you have, if you look at, and let's put it this way,
it's like a natural leadership thing. I know it sounds misogynistic, but it's not.
Yeah, but the men form hierarchies based on skills, and they specialize and stuff like that. And the ones who were natural leaders, they're the ones who came to the top and started organizing everybody, to do certain tasks and stuff like that, right? And you know, this is where you end up with nations starting to rise. I mean, if you look at, I mean, I think Family Guy made a bit of a joke about this, right? Is that this? I'll put that one, a clip that's there. But it's basically that showing that guys can get along without any emotional crap going on better than we can. There's the guy. If the guy tells you, "Hey, nice tie," I'm like, "Oh, thank you." Right? You go up to tell the lady, "Oh, nice dress." I'm like, "What are you implying?"
Girls! Ugh, come on, Chris. Girls are terrible. They're always backstabbing and giving each other phony compliments.
Oh, wow. You are definitely not afraid of dessert.
You know, I wish I were secure enough to throw on any old thing and call it an outfit.
Come on. You have so much body confidence. I mean, who wouldn't with those strong legs? So muscular. I'm jealous of how thick with strength they are.
Hey, I like your tie.
Thanks.
Men, we know how to be friends.
Right?
Yeah, that's a can of worms for sure.
But
now, no, like I said, and we have to do a better job as society. And I think the turn is coming, right? The turn is coming, and at the same time as you're seeing a fight against the toxic masculinity, right? The positive masculinity is coming out. The people that, like, I'm trying to be an example of a guy where, sure, I can hit a punching bag, sure, I can break some boards, sure, I can do this stuff, but also I'm going to hug my children, and also I'm going to try and be the best husband I can be.
Exactly.
Also, which is a difficult job. Like, it's hard to do all of these things. And in fact, I mean, I have to say that it's probably the hardest to be a man now than ever in history. And I'm not saying it's not hard to be a woman, because women have always had a hard job. They've always had the most important job in my mind, honestly. But I think now it's so confusing to be a man. Also confusing to be a woman as well, because a lot of women these days, or even the last 50 years or 100 years, they've been growing up with this idea that you can do whatever you want, and you can do whatever you want. But honestly, they're getting two messages. The message from their grandmothers are, find a nice man, make a nice family. The message from their society and school is, don't worry about that, go get a career. That's hard. That's hard to mesh that together. It's possible, of course.
You should be listening to grandma.
You should be listening to
grandma is the one who cares.
The bottom line is, exactly, the grandma cares a hell of a lot more than your school, a hell of a lot more than your government does, and a hell of a lot more than any hospital or anything. And it's true. That's one of the things that I say, even during this whole COVID thing, is you don't have to be a scientist. Go talk to your grandmother.
Yeah. I remember one friend of mine, he argued that, teachers spend more time with your kid than you do throughout the day. I'm like, yeah, well, throughout the day. Well, I spend more time with my kid throughout his life. Right. Same with my wife. She does. So, and a family, if you have strong families, you end up with good, when you raise good kids, you end up with a good society. That's all it is. Exactly. And breaking this up, and breaking that up is not really going to help anything. No. Right.
Exactly. And at the simplistic state, we can always think that too. Like, when is breaking up a family, when is breaking up anything ever a good idea? So, yeah, I don't know. All right. Well, I think we should wrap it up, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're out of time, everybody. So we could keep on going with this, but the thing is, we'll see where it takes us next time. We can go on the next topic. So we'll see you all in the next video. Peace.
Right.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Take care. Peace. Hi, and thanks for watching this episode of Centerville Voice. If you like what you see, don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're watching this on YouTube, also click on the notifications icon to make sure you'll get notified on all of our new episodes every Friday. By sharing and liking this episode and all of our episodes, it really helps to promote the channel. And by sharing these episodes, it helps to promote our word and get the word out. If you like what you see and hear, please consider becoming one of our supporters on Patreon. 10% of all Patreon supporter donations we receive go directly to our charity of the year. This year, our charity of the year is the Terry Fox Foundation. You can visit us at centervillevoice.com to learn more and engage with us on one of our social media platforms. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Peace.